Most people think of the Garden of Eden only in terms of Genesis, but the idea of an original sacred place appears throughout ancient Sumerian, Babylonian, and Near Eastern texts. The idea of a beginning place appears across numerous ancient cultures under different names, but each culture seems to be preserving a different piece of the same ancient memory. So, why is this important? Well, how we remember our beginnings influences how we relate to knowledge, authority, and free will today. Many people seem to know the Genesis version of the Garden of Eden, but when we revisit these older versions of the story, we're not just studying the past, we're questioning the framework through which humanity has understood itself for thousands of years. If you're new here, I'm Erica, and for years I've been exploring the world studying ancient texts, forgotten wisdom, and the way nature teaches us to live in harmony. So today we're going to explore one of humanity's oldest attempts to remember a beginning place of where we came from, who guided us, and why knowledge changed everything. For nearly 2 centuries, archaeologists and scholars have been trying to locate the Garden of Eden, not as a metaphor, but as an actual place rooted somewhere in our ancient human timeline. When a concept emerges repeatedly across ancient texts, it deserves to be examined with curiosity rather than just ignored as a myth. In 1922, British archaeologist C. Leonard Woolley traveled to southern Iraq hoping to uncover traces of Eden itself. Instead, he discovered the ancient Sumerian city of and he wasn't alone in this pursuit. Earlier in 1849, Henry Layard had excavated thousands of Sumerian tablets from the city of Sapur and Nippur. He discovered over 20,000 tablets in total, to be exact. Among these tablets were a dozen containing references that sounded remarkably like the biblical Eden. These early excavators weren't just documenting history. Many were driven by a desire to prove the Bible true. Yet what they found opened up doors to stories far older, far broader, and far stranger than what the biblical narrative alone provides. Thankfully, later cultures, especially the Babylonians, translated many of these Sumerian tablets into languages that we can decode today. Sumerian itself is an isolated language, unrelated to any known linguistic family, meaning that without those translations, those 20,000 ancient tablets would have remained unreadable, but we are able to read them. We are able to read them, but even with the translations, we run into a familiar problem. Translators rarely agree. One scholar can interpret a passage one way while another comes to a totally different conclusion. This is why I became so interested in the work of Anton Parks, a French researcher who spent decades studying Near Eastern traditions, comparative mythology, and ancient languages. Park argues that some of the most important tablets referencing Eden have been mistranslated or perhaps softened over time. His interpretations present a version of humanity's origins that is radically different from what most of us have been taught. Now, scholars generally consider ancient Sumer as the birthplace of civilization, right? It's the origin of writing, science, government, religion, and many of the narratives we still recognize today. Their creation story predates the biblical narrative by thousands of years, which you can learn more about in my YouTube video titled Forgotten Stories, Forgotten Roots. Many early scholars believe the biblical Eden must lie somewhere near the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in modern-day Iraq, marked by the region's prominence in both ancient history and scripture. If Eden was real, they reason, it must have been there. But these Sumerian tablets both confirm and complicate that picture, offering descriptions that point not to the river valleys of Mesopotamia, but to high mountain regions to the north. The fascination with the Middle East region extends far beyond archaeology and theology. The Middle East is deeply significant to all three major Abrahamic religions, to esoteric researchers, and to anyone studying the human origins. This land is part of our collective ancestry, and as we see in our modern world, there is a lot of fighting happening over these territories that are frankly important to all of us. So, whether one views the Garden of Eden as a literal history or a symbolic myth, the idea of a beginning place appears across cultures and texts far older than the Genesis account. Even the word paradise, which we typically associate with like a lush, peaceful garden, originally comes from the Greek word paradisios, meaning an enclosed park for animals. Now, this original definition becomes important when we look at these Sumerian tablets. So, according to Anton Parks translations, the original Sumerian term describes a place where the men who serve the gods work for them in the garden and are treated like animals. In other words, the term garden in this translation is more like an enclosed habitat, more like a controlled compound than a paradise. In the Hebrew Bible, Eden is a place of innocence and harmony. In the Sumerian worldview, it appears as something entirely different. A highly controlled, enclosed zone where humans function almost as slaves or laborers for divine, higher level beings or gods. Now, keep in mind the Sumerian term for gods does not mean the ultimate divine source. It refers to advanced, higher level beings, not the one ultimate creator. This concept can be difficult to grasp, which I understand, and I explore it in more depth in my video titled Solve This Riddle. The location associated with this early garden is called Karasog in these tablets. Interestingly, Turkey's highest volcanic peaks are called Karadağ, a name strikingly similar. Researchers have noted that a mountain near the Mesopotamian plain, close to the rivers of both the Tigris and Euphrates, matches several geographical clues found in these texts. According to Parks and others, this elevated plateau may be the original Eden site referenced by the Sumerians. Now, none of this has been proven. It is pure speculation because archaeologists and scholars have not been able to explore this area. This area lies in a region that is politically unstable and extremely dangerous for us to access, preventing researchers from verifying these theories like on the ground. Now, Genesis describes Eden as the source of 4 rivers, the Pishon, the Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates. Only the last 2 exist today. Scholars have debated the identity of the other 2 rivers for like centuries, but the Sumerian story describes something different entirely. They describe a settlement built by higher level beings or gods after a devastating war in the sky. These beings, according to the tablets, did not originate here on Earth. They are not Earthlings. Parks and several other independent researchers suggest they came from the Pleiades star cluster seeking refuge after a conflict. Once they arrived to Earth, they set out to create conditions necessary for life to flourish here and to establish a colony. Within these texts appears a council of gods, including familiar names like Enki and Enlil. And to learn more about these very familiar gods, check out my YouTube episode titled Forgotten Stories, Forgotten Roots. Now, Enlil is a stern and controlling god, often hostile towards humanity. Enki, the god of wisdom, is more sympathetic, a little bit of a trickster, but also an ally to human beings. And this dynamic becomes central to the Eden narrative. As these gods, these higher level beings explore Earth, they quickly realize that they are not alone. They encounter early primitive humans, Earthlings, who were biologically capable, but we were not really fully developed yet in terms of cognition, culture, or self-awareness. The text suggests that these beings became curious about humanity's potential and began intervening in the natural evolutionary process. These texts kind of sound very familiar in what we're doing today in terms of like cloning and AI. According to these texts, Enki, the god who is sympathetic towards Earthlings, begins working with these priestesses of life who are skilled in cloning techniques. They start experimenting to create a new version of humanity. Enlil, the hostile god, demanded we be modified into obedient, predictable workers, but Enki wanted something more, beings capable of wisdom and autonomy. Enki's deviation from Enlil's orders to make us Earthlings obedient and predictable sparked a huge conflict among the gods. I mean, this turns into a cosmic family dispute with us Earthlings caught in the middle. Now, this brings us to one of the most fascinating parallels, the serpent in the biblical Garden of Eden. Have you ever heard of the conspiracy theories about reptilian beings? Well, this concept of reptilian beings originates back to these ancient texts, at least from my perspective. In the Sumerian descriptions, many of the gods, including Enki and Enlil, are described with serpent-like or reptilian features. They're humanoids, but with reptilian features. Enlil, the god who is harsh towards humans, is often referred to in these texts as the Great Satan. This title bears an unsettling resemblance to another name that we all know. Enki, the god who is friendly towards humans, is often described as the serpent, not because he's evil, but because of his appearance and because of his role as a bringer of forbidden knowledge, at least according to the Sumerian texts. In these texts, the women in the garden, which remember is more like an enclosed structure for animals. So these women in the garden are responsible for gathering food for the gods' colony. But Enki, who is often sent by Enlil to negotiate with the humans, he goes rogue. He goes completely rogue. He doesn't want us humans to be slaves anymore. He secretly starts teaching us tool making. Tool making is knowledge that could help us Earthlings feed ourselves, defend ourselves, and ultimately gain independence. In this version of the story, Enki's temptation is not malicious, it's an act of liberation. Many researchers, including thinkers like Graham Hancock, who I highly respect, believe that this was a handing over of knowledge. The ability to choose, think, and act freely is the original sin in the eyes of the controlling gods, because this was seen, at least in these tablets, as humanity's awakening. Now, this leads us back to the word Adam. Extensive linguistic studies reveal that Adam does not originate in Hebrew as one might expect, as I expected. It's a Sumerian word meaning animal. To the gods, us early humans were not companions or partners. We were biological workers. Enlil wanted us kept in a controlled, predictable, subservient state. Enki believed we could be something more. And according to these ancient Sumerian tablets, this ideological battle between two higher beings shaped the story that we know today as the Garden of Eden. Whether one interprets these tablets as truth, mythology, mistranslation, extraterrestrial history, or just a metaphor for an ancient human development, the question remains profound. What if the story of Eden wasn't about the fall of humanity, but about our first act of rebellion? What if the serpent wasn't the deceiver, but the liberator? And what if Eden itself wasn't a paradise lost, but a memory of containment? Now, I'm not claiming any of this is truth. I'm just bringing in another perspective. I understand that this angle can feel destabilizing. It challenges the familiar Genesis narrative, a story that has shaped centuries of belief of who we are, where we came from, and what it means to fall from grace. For many, the story of Adam and Eve is foundational in their faiths, which I deeply respect. And I explore that version more deeply in my episode titled, Is This World Real? But the existence of one story doesn't erase the possibility of another. If Eden was a place where humans were cared for but controlled, fed but contained, then the moments of leaving changes the meaning entirely. Knowledge, awareness, free will may not have been a fall from perfection, but a departure from safety. And freedom, as we know, comes at a cost. Free will introduces suffering, uncertainty, and responsibility, but it also makes growth, creativity, and self-awareness possible. So what do you think of this take on a very different narrative of a beginning place? I'd love to hear in the comments below. And as always, have a good week.